So again, my philosophy on student success is that students are far more capable of deep learning than believed and much closer to it than perceived. That kind of summarizes how I see students, and that leads to the transforming students into great learners approach that I've kind of developed. And so I'll tell you a little bit about how I kind of developed this particular approach to students. Years ago, I was the director of student success at Lenoir University, which is the university that I'm currently employed with, and I encountered a group of students. Well, I started working with students who were primarily on academic probation. And these students were perceived on campus to be either those on the lower end of the entrance scale who maybe should not have been in college, let's say, or they were, oh, okay, you want me to speak a little slower? Will do. For our Spanish-speaking friends, I will do that. So I started seeing students who were on academic probation. Again, on our campus, the perception was that these students were not bright, that they were the students who were barely admitted. That was one of the predominant perceptions. And then the other perception was that these students were goofing off in college, that they weren't taking college seriously. And of course, I did have students who fit those two categories, but I also realized that there was a group of students who were being unrecognized, unidentified, who were capable, hardworking students who had success in high school. However, in college, they were struggling mightily. And even some of them had had some success earlier in their college career, but they hit a wall, a stopping point in which they couldn't go any further, and they didn't know what to do, and these students were just struggling. And so I encountered these students, and I met with them individually. I used my counseling approach. I met with them, suspended all of my judgments about why students didn't succeed in college. I didn't allow myself to fall to the very common, but I think hurtful, harmful beliefs that, students are goofed, that they're just dumb, or this generation of students are somehow flawed compared to other generations. And I just let the students tell their story. So I would listen to them, and I would always ask what I believe is the most important question that those who seek to help college students could ask, which is, what kind of student were you in high school? And in asking that question, I was listening for how they perceived themselves as students. Now, in the early years, I actually verified their experiences with their transcripts, and sometimes talking to people from their hometown, teachers, parents, counselors. I would talk to admissions counselors on our campus, really trying to get a holistic picture of who these students were, and just trying to find out a little bit about them. And I realized that these students were hardworking students who just were missing something in their academic performance. And that something is kind of what this is all about, is what is the something that students are missing that can help them improve their academic performance. And so I originally started working with these students individually, and it became very common for me to meet with students. They would come into that meeting making 30s or 40s on exams, very low grades. I would have an hour-long session with them, and they would leave, and they would make high 90s on their next test or high 80s on their next test. I mean, significant jumps in academic performance. That kind of happened for quite some time, and I worked with a lot of students who were in our nursing program, because nursing is one of those very rigorous programs, and students have to maintain at least a 78 average in order to continue in the program. And the nursing school found out that these students were having this type of success, and so they had me do workshops within their school every semester. And after doing those, a couple years later, I received an email from them saying that they had received 100% first-time pass rate on the NCLEX, which is the National Nursing Exam. And they, of course, they did most of the work, and they credited me with helping them along in that progress. So I was very thankful to see that they were having success. From there, word spread out throughout our campus, and I started working with students in other programs, and they began to have similar success as well. Which then I attended a professional development conference in which called the Kellogg Institute at Appalachian State University. And I was just sharing with colleagues and listening to colleagues, and they asked me sort of what was going on at my institution. And to be quite honest, at first, I didn't think I had anything to share. And then I started talking about these experiences that I'm sharing with you now, and they got really interested. And after a while, they began to encourage me to share this on a broader scale. And so they encouraged me to create a blog, and which I had never considered doing before, and wouldn't have thought that I would be the person to do such a thing. However, I did, and I really didn't know what I would write. And so I had a long time ago, when I was working with these students, I was trying to figure out why these good students, who I thought were good students, were doing poorly in college. And so I had written about it. And so I pulled that back out and just wrote an article called Why Good Students Do Bad in College. And many of you have probably read that. I sent you a document that had it as a link in it. And also, if you haven't, you can simply Google Why Good Students Do Bad in College, and that should come up because it's been viewed by thousands of educators and students, and many people include it in their syllabus, or they require their students to read it before the semester or something along those lines. And that kind of set off the sequence of events of me really developing this a little more and doing a lot of conducting some research to put some research backing behind it and those kinds of things. So that's kind of where we are now. And so I want to give you a little history of my academic background, my philosophy, and sort of how this transforming good students came about. I do want to point out, if I may switch gears, in the document that I sent out, did any of you, chance for you to use the chat feature here, did any of you open the document that says 2013 Thinking Well and Learning Well Terms and Concepts? If you did, please just note that in the chat feature. Great, most of you did. See at one institution. Some of you did not. Okay, some of you haven't had a chance to. Okay, some of you didn't see it. If you do not have that document, please email me. It's not urgent or particularly urgent for today, but if you did not, then please email me. It was in attached to the document that had the webinar links. So you should see that in there. But that document is a research article that basically articulates the experience that a lot of professors face. And I won't read the whole thing, of course, but I'll just give you a little highlight of it. Basically says that incoming students often were moderately or even highly successful in high school, and their expectation is that the skills that produce success in high school will transfer successfully to college academics. However, the expectation and learning model in high school is often very different than they are in college. And then it goes on to say that when students approach it, low achieving students in particular often report that Someone asked, is it on the wiki? It's not on the wiki, but I will add it to the wiki, Heather. So continuing with the article, it says that low-achieving students in particular often report that they felt that they knew the material well going into the exam, but then were shocked at their exam grade. I know many of you have seen your students experience that. Compounding the problem is the fact that most higher education faculty have little or no training in study skills or learning strategies or teaching. I could add to that. That's my own addition. Also, given that many faculty were exceptional students, hence their academic success, they may have no experience with such learning challenges. So when a student approaches an instructor on how to do well in their course, many faculty truly have little to offer the student other than study harder. This can be extremely frustrating for both the student and the faculty member. And that's kind of the predicament that we're in. And that article addresses that issue. And I actually wrote the article before I came across this particular research article, but I do find it very affirming. And so we're in a situation where students have been successful. So we know that they have had some success. However, that success is not translating to college, and we're going to look at why that happens and how to make them then transfer. So that kind of sets the stage for where we're going. So kind of go over the overall, you should see the overall webinar learning outcomes on your screen. And so the overall webinar learning outcomes are quite simple. And if you receive the information about the webinar, they're consistent with those. And what I mean by outcomes, this is what my metrics are in terms of what I want you all to be able to do after these 3 webinars are over. So again, after these 3 webinars are over, this is what I want you all to be able to do. 1 is to be equipped to incorporate metacognitive strategies into instruction and or learning support programs. Another outcome is to be able to provide direct metacognitive assistance to students experiencing academic problems. And another is to be able to provide educators and students a framework for teaching and thinking and learning deeply. And then finally, to be able to directly and efficiently improve students' reading comprehension levels. Those are the overall webinar outcomes. And today's webinar outcomes, or expectations, I should say, for today's webinar are, I want to look at who are the good students. So the whole title, of course, transforming good students into great learners. So we're going to explore who the good students are. We're going to look at how they function when they get to us, meaning how are they coming to us, and then what's the road they must travel to get to where they need to go. Those are the 3 things that we're going to cover today, and then we're going to build upon that in the subsequent webinars. Let me check the back channel to see if anyone's back. No one's back channeling yet. Okay, I'm just going to keep checking to make sure. So I can respond to any questions or anything. So let's look at the types of students. So there are 3 types of students that make up our campuses. One extreme are great learners. And great learners are students who just get it when they come to college. These students don't have many academic problems. They transition rather easily. An example of a great learner would be Sam. Sam is a real student who I encountered. And Sam was actually a student who we had a course that we needed a tutor for. We didn't have a tutor that had taken that course, a student that was signed up as a tutor to tutor for that course. However, one of the professors for the course recommended a student, Sam. He told me, he said, now Sam's never taken this course, but she would be an effective tutor for this course even though she hadn't taken it. Now, this was a new experience for me, and I was a little cautious and skeptical, so I asked the professor why he thought she would be able to do it. He just said, I know her, I took her, she took me for other courses, she'd be able to do it. I believed the professor, but I wanted to verify with the student, so I called the student in for a meeting. And I asked her, I said, so Sam, Dr. So-and-so has has recommended you as a tutor for this course that you've never taken. How do you feel about that? And Sam looked at me and she said, if I get the notes, the book, then I can help this. If I get the notes and the book, then I can help the student. Oh, and the syllabus. Sorry. Said if I get the notes, the book, and the syllabus, then I can help the students get what they need to get out of it to be successful in that course. And I thought, wow, that is a definition of a great learner. Here's a student who, given the resources, can navigate her way through selecting the important and more salient information from the other information that surrounds it. That is an example of a great learner. And all of us have encountered those students who just get it, right? Those are the ones that professors love in class. Those are the ones who just, they make our lives really, really, really easy. However, they are a minority on every college campus. So on the other extreme, we have what I call academically poor students. And academically poor students, yes, their grades are poor, but this particular group of students not just perform poorly, but they also don't really seem to be emotionally ready for college. They are goofing off. Maybe they're not that serious about college. Perhaps they have a true skill deficit, and I mean in a very, very narrow sense. But more they're students who just aren't ready for college. And even if you did give them something that was successful, they're not really interested in being really, really great students. So an example of a poor student would be this student who I had a former basketball player who I was working with, and the coach forced the student to come in and meet with me. I went over some things that we're going to go over throughout this webinar series with him, and I didn't hear from him after a couple of weeks. So I'm one to always follow up with students. So I started tracking him down, trying to figure out what was going on. And of course, you can imagine, I believed that maybe things didn't work out so well and he was avoiding me. However, when I tracked him down, I said, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. You haven't responded to my emails. How have things been going? And he said, oh man, I'm making a C now, which was a marked improvement because he was making grades in like the 30s and 40s before. So he was making, I'm making C's in my courses now. I said, great, man. I'm really happy to hear that. I said, well, let's get together and meet so we can move those C's to B's and maybe even A's. And the student looked at me and just matter-of-factly said, C's gets degrees, baby. And I said, what? And he said, C's gets degrees, baby. And I realized that this student was just okay with being average. He didn't want to do any more than that. If he could just pass the class with a C, that was okay. So that's an example of a poor student. And these strategies will work with them, but they really aren't interested in moving to the top. They just kind of want to get by. However, the group that we're going to focus on are what I call good students. And these good students are, again, they're capable. Sorry, I'm going ahead of myself. They're capable, hardworking students who really want to become great learners, but they need some assistance, and the type of assistance we're going to give them. And so good students, they're the majority of our students. And we have a tendency to focus more on the poor students because they require so much attention. But I'm going to encourage you to kind of discipline your thoughts to really focus on those students that are good students. Okay, moving forward. So, again, as I said before, students are much closer to deep learning than perceived. Students are actually expert learners. So many of you have any of you, again, a chance to use the chat feature, have any of you read the book or heard of the 10,000 hour rule by Malcolm Gladwell from his book Outliers? If you have, just simply let me know by typing it into the chat feature. While you're doing that, I'll continue to keep us moving. But the 10,000 hour rule simply means that it takes about 10,000 hours of practice in order to become proficient, or he says expert at something. Now, that 10,000 hours, of course, is a focused kind of 10,000 hours. And so, but he says by 10,000 hours, it takes about, it takes that to become experts at something. And he looks at it from a variety of different industries and fields and contexts. And so that's kind of one of the core principles of his book. So I'd like you to, for those of you who have not heard me say this before, I'd like you to think about this in terms of our students. And so I'm asking you a question, and you can put it in the chat, your answer in the chat feature. By the time students ever enter our college, enter our doors, how many hours have they invested in studying just going to high school? I mean, not high school, sorry, K through 12 if you're in the United States. For our friends in Colombia, you may have a different system, but by the time students reach college, how many hours have they invested in school? Take a guess. $500 hours, someone says. Any other guesses? Let's get one more and then I'll move us forward. $10,800. Very close. Actually, students have invested more than, I see 1,300. Students have invested more than 16,000 hours. If you count kindergarten through 12th grade, that's 13 years, 180 days a year, 7 to 8 hours a day. That's if they did nothing outside of class. They've invested more than 16,000 hours in learning. And I believe that they have become very skilled learners. Again, the good students, they've become very skilled learners. However, the way that they've learned and the system in which they've learned isn't necessarily compatible to how they need to learn. So let's look at this system. So you should see on the screen a comparison document that compares high school and college. So I developed this for our first year experience course on our campus, which we have integrated a lot of these metacognitive strategies into our class. And the purpose of this activity is to help students see the structural differences between the pre-college and college environment, because these structural differences can provide important insight into the different approaches that are necessary for each environment. And we usually walk through this in a very inquisitive way and allow students to walk their way through and include the answers. But I'm going to just kind of get through this so that you all can understand this. And what we're focusing on now is how students approach college. And so let me get my little writing tool here. So over here in high school, let's look at the typical student's, American student at least, experience. Students are in class 7 to 8 hours a day. In those classes, in those courses, they're taking 10 to 12 tests. This is according to students that I've asked at various campuses and various events over the years. They're taking 10 to 12 tests in those courses, and those tests are typically covering one chapter on average. Some will say a little less than one, maybe maybe they have a test twice a chapter. Some will have a test every 2 chapters. Most will say about 1. So it's important to know that. And then, equally important is the fact that the teacher is playing a significant role in helping them be successful. So what's happening is, again, you have students in class 7 to 8 hours a day. In those classes, they're taking 7 to 10 tests, 10 to 12 tests. One chapter, those tests are covering one chapter, and the teacher plays a very significant role. And it's important to understand that, because this high school structure and experience, this is their childhood. This is their childhood. This is how they've grown up. This is the very approach that they're going to bring with them to college. And so it's important to look at the role that the teacher played in preparing them to be successful. And so the teacher reinforces students' learning all throughout class. And the way that they do this is they teach them material. They may go over this in terms of study guides. They may do this in terms of handouts, reading in class, going over notes, going over homework. All these different ways the teacher is playing a significant role in preparing them to be successful. So in this environment over here, students have developed a certain relationship to educators and what they see as educators' role in preparing them to be successful. Along with that, a cognitive and metacognitive process has also been instilled and is being instilled within them. And so they've been conditioned to interact with educators in a certain way, and they've also been conditioned to learn in which cognitive processes to engage in this environment as well. And when they leave the high school environment and go over to college, this experience informs everything that they do in college. However, let's look at the structure in college. In college, students are in class 3 to 4 hours 3 to 4 hours a day. They're taking only 3 to 4 tests, a significant decrease. However, those tests are covering sometimes 5 to 7 chapters, and that is that's a very significant increase. And in college, the student is now plays a much more responsible role for teaching themselves. And that is, of course, what we often call independent learning or self-directed learning. So let's just look at the two environments. They leave high school with the expectation that college is going to be harder. But you all know how college is, right? They get to college and they may not have a test for several weeks, which they're accustomed to having many more tests. They're in class a lot less, which oftentimes students interpret as more time for me to sleep. But they don't realize that they need to be a much more independent learner because those tests are covering a greater degree of information. And so it's important for students to see this played out because in an explicit way, because they may mentally sort of acknowledge this, but it's important they understand the consequences and how this affects their reality. Linda, I do see that you emailed me about you can only stay for another 20 minutes. I may have you say a little bit about what's going on your campus at another date, if that's okay. So let's move on to learning approaches. Now, there's a lot of research been done about learning approaches. And basically the summary is that students are going to approach learning in one of two ways. They're going to either have a surface approach or a deep approach. And depending on how they approach college, that approach is going to determine what they get from their interaction in class, what they get from text and textbooks when they read. It's going to determine what they get from their actual study sessions. So all of these things are affected by how they approach college. So what is an approach? An approach is how students conceive or conceptualize learning, what they believe constitutes learning both in themselves and in others. All students have a learning approach, and that learning approach will determine how students will actually learn. And so the way that I look at a learning approach is it's kind of like it's a paradigm that they see the world of learning through. So I like to relate it to pessimism and optimism. So a person who is optimistic, they go into a situation and they just see things, possibilities, opportunities. They don't try to do this. It's not a conscious, deliberate action. It's more of a window through which they see the world. Conversely, a person who is pessimistic enters the same situation, and they see the world through an entirely different lens, and they see things as very negative, and they see all the potential problems. It's just how they see the world. Again, it's not something that they're trying to do. They may not even be conscious of it, but depending on whether they have a pessimistic approach or a optimistic approach, is going to affect how they see everything. And so likewise with students who have a surface approach tend to think very shallowly about college and about learning. Conversely, students who have a deep approach tend to think, just the way that they think about things are much deeper. And part of our focus is to help move students from surface approaches to deep approaches. So look at that high school to college transition again, because that's a fundamental part of a student's transition. So the way that I've helped folks communicate this transition is in the simple idea of the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule simply means this: 80% of what students need to know in high school came from one source, their teacher. 20% they did on their own. Now, many students will disagree with me when I say this, and they say, no, I think my school is 90-10. So they're thinking that the teacher did much more of a role. And what they're simply acknowledging is that the teacher played a significant role in helping them be successful. And I don't mean this in a negative way. I don't think that this is something necessarily negative. It's just how it works. And so that 80% that the teacher led came in the form of class discussions, worksheets, homework, going over homework, pop quizzes, study guides, etc. And the 20% is what students did on their own. Transition to college, and that 80-20 rule flips, and now it's the 20-80 rule. And here's what that means. That means that the professor will supply students with 20% of the information, and students must generate the other 80% on their own. Now, the 20% that the professor provides is important, but students must understand, and we must help them understand, that it's only 20%. And this is an important point, so allow me to explain experientially why this is important. And if there are any students that are listening, I would love for you to chat whether this resonates with you or not, or learning professionals or professors as well. You can chat as well if you see this resonating with you. But here's how this plays out. Let's say Johnny. Johnny goes to Professor so-and-so's class. And again, coming with the high school approach, he sits in class and he's taking down the notes that the professor gives. Now, we know that in high school, students are going to get much more in terms of notes and handouts and things like that than they're going to get in college. So they come to college and they have less information from the professor, but they're still going to try to know everything the professor has said. They're going to try to memorize everything the professor has said in class. And so when Johnny leaves and he goes back to study throughout the period between the beginning of class and the first test, his entire study regimen is focused upon memorizing what was said in class. Or if the professor pointed out any particular thing in a book, he's going to try to commit that to his memory. And here's the kicker. In the past, if he did that really, really well, he'd get a pretty good grade for that particular area or that particular material. But in college, if he does that and knows every single thing the professor has said, he is only going to have a fraction of what's needed to be successful on the upcoming test. That is a foreign idea for students. And so this is why students go to class oftentimes and they're asking professors, is this going to be on the test? That response, that particular question is in response to the years in which the educator has mainly helped them be successful on their test. And so it shouldn't surprise us that students come with those particular sets of questions. And so when students go into class, again, they believe that that if they know what the professor did in class, then that's sufficient for them to be able to do well on the exam. And they don't realize that there's another 80%. So there's the acquiring, which is the 20%, acquiring the information, and then the other 80% consists of developing that information. And that 80% development is something that students are just unfamiliar with. Does that make sense to you all? Does that resonate with your experiences? A lot of professors provide most of the material through lecture. Now, by most, do you mean the 20% or the 80%? The 80%. Interesting. What I found is that professors will provide a lot of that material through lectures, but what they actually test for in terms of from the student's perspective and what they lecture for are different. What I mean by that is students will study the lecture notes or even a study guide that they may get, but then they always say the way they word this material on the test is different. They're trying to trick us with the way they question the material. And oftentimes the reason that they experience that is because although the professor may go over, for instance, say mitosis in class, and in experience, the test is going to actually ask them for something to do something much deeper than just sort of memorize what is mitosis. I'll say another comment. We don't agree. We agree that the test asks for more than 20% given the information. So you've seen the same experience. Maybe I didn't clarify that as much, but perhaps Joe has a different experience at his institution at St. Mary's. Joe, does that clarify things? So you can feel free to chat. I'm going to move along. It does? Okay, great. And then we all have different experiences, so I'm not trying to put my experience over anyone else's. So let's look at metacognition. So metacognition, most of you may be familiar with it in terms of thinking about thinking. And so metacognition, and this is a research definition that's somewhat old, but it's still one of the better ones that I found. Metacognition is an appreciation of what one already knows, together with the correct apprehension of the learning task and what knowledge and skills it requires, combined with the agility to make correct inferences about how to apply one's strategic knowledge to a particular situation, and to do so efficiently and reliably. And so that's a long, wonky research way of looking at that, but it's very important that this area of metacognition. One reason is because metacognition is a fundamental factor in critical thinking, in strategic thinking, in terms of studying time management, directing study activities, and tactical thinking, which are the specific studying practices that students use. And so a couple of things about that research says about metacognition that I should point out. Switching screens here to bring up this some research on metacognition for you. Bear with me while I pull up another document for you. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to have to skip that. That document won't come up, but I can include that on the wiki. But basically some basic research points about metacognition. And the summary of it is that metacognition has shown to improve students in terms of their GPA. It's been correlated to increases in GPA. It's been correlated to intelligence in general. It's shown to improve student reading comprehension, and it's been shown to be something that can be students can gain in a relatively short period of time. So students can move from lack of metacognitive awareness to being very metacognitively aware in a very short period of time. And so here's another way of looking at metacognition. So these aren't the metacognitive questions. These are types of metacognitive questions. And so just to give you an example, it's this is kind of how students who are metacognitively aware approach learning. And these questions help deepen their learning. As you all probably know, asking questions when it comes to learning and studying is actually more important than finding the answers. And so prior to college, many students' entire studying routine has been about finding answers. And in college, we're asking them to do something fundamentally different oftentimes, which is to interact with material by asking deep questions. And so let's say we were taking the laws of thermodynamics and we were metacognitively aware. Then we will be asking, what do I know about the laws of thermodynamics? And then what must I know? Meaning that if I'm going to be tested on this, or if I'm going to have to write a paper on this particular thing, what must I be able to produce on that paper? What am I going to be tested on? A type of knowledge I'm going to be tested on. How do I get to what I need to know? What strategies will get me there? Meaning, will I read a book? Will I take notes? What will I do to get there? What's the quickest and surest way of the strategies to get me there? Because no one wants to waste time. And then once I've interacted with this material, what will I be able to do with that particular material? And this question of what will I be able to do is a very important question that we're going to focus on throughout the webinar series, because we're going to help students be able to accurately interpret or judge their knowledge. You may think back to that portion of the article, the research article that I read, when they talk about how students oftentimes feel like they studied the right material. Well, that's because students aren't accurately they're not making accurate judgments of knowledge. And there's a reason for that, and we're going to help them make more accurate judgments of knowledge. See, someone said something. Let me see. Oh, okay, someone has to leave. Okay. Thanks for letting me know. And so that's the type of approach we're going to have students engage in. So what we're doing now, so just kind of what we've done is we've covered sort of who are these good students, kind of these are students that are in the middle. They're hard to diagnose because on exams they may resemble poor students, but in attitude and in ability and capability, they may resemble great learners. So there's kind of a mixed diagnosis in there. And so now let's look at this continuum that we're going to take our students on. And then I'm going to allow a colleague to talk about how students kind of navigated this particular experience on her. And so Tricia, if you can get ready, I'm going to give you the floor here shortly. So what you see here is a continuum that I've created to help us kind of chart where students are, and again, more importantly, to help students chart where they are in their own progression. And so over here, let me get my little tool out here. Students, over here is metacognitive awareness. One of the things the research shows that students already are engaging in metacognitive activity. The problem is they're unaware of it. And so again, metacognition is thinking about your thinking in layman's terms. So students are thinking about their thinking to some degree. They just don't know that they're doing it. And so they're going to start here at stage 1, which is called unconscious usage, meaning that they're already using this skill. They just don't know it. And so we're going to expose them to some information and utility in an effort to move them to conscious incompetence. And that's stage 2, and that's where they become aware of their metacognitive abilities when they're studying and when they're reading and when they're engaged in learning activities, but they still may not be able to use it. And they're going to get there pretty fast. And then from there, we're going to give them some training and feedback through the stuff we're going to learn throughout the rest of the other 2 sessions. And then they're going to move towards conscious competence. And conscious competence is where they can execute the skill now, but it takes a lot of concentration. It's not natural to them. It's not second nature. And then eventually, through practice and experience, they're going to move to unconscious competence, which is where the skill is second nature to them. They just do it without thinking. Many of you may find, and many professors operate at this unconscious competence level. And so it makes it more difficult for them to go back and work with students because they've never really unpacked what they know. They just know it. And so we're going to help students be able to move along this continuum from metacognitive awareness toward metacognitive control in a very simple, short order fashion. And you'll find that students will resonate with the strategies that we'll cover it'll resonate with them really well, and then that they will actually have success. So I'm going to turn it over to Tricia Travis, who directs the Learning Center at Yavapai College in Arizona. And Tricia, I'd like you to just share a little bit about your experience implementing. Tricia participated in a webinar, was it a year ago, Tricia?
I think it was like a year and a half ago.
Okay, can everyone hear Tricia? Make sure that everyone can hear you as well. Can you all hear Tricia?
Can anybody hear me?
We'll see. Sometimes it takes a little while for folks to respond. I can hear. Yes, they can hear you. It said there's an echo, but they can hear you. So yeah. So you talk about your experience.
Well, after attending Leonard's webinar, I implemented a section of the workshop series at my campus, and I think I had a very good response from the students. They were really excited about the concepts that I was talking to them about. And so my supervisor asked me if I would expand it a little bit, and so the following semester I did a session at my campus and one of our other campuses as well. And then, so that was last spring. This fall semester, I actually expanded out into the local high school, one of our local high schools, where we're offering some dual enrollment classes, and presented the information to some high school students who were kind of making the transition between high school and college classes while they're still in high school. So that was kind of an exciting thing to do, and also got very good response from those students as well.
Great.
Another thing that I've done with this with the concepts here is, well, for one thing, a lot of what is presented in the workshops is theoretical in nature, and so what I was trying to one of the things that I have tried to do is bring it down to some specific techniques and strategies that the students can put to work in their studying. Because like Leonard was saying, I think they can pick up on it pretty quickly given some direction. And so, you know, once you present the theoretical part of it, then I think breaking it down into looking at the study cycle and, you know, things that you do before you start to study, things that you do while you're studying, and things that you do once you're finished studying, and thinking about that in terms of what are good positive things to do versus not such good things. And so in the pre-planning, the pre-study aspect, looking at predicting and planning, thinking about, you know, what strategies am I going to use, what is it that I need to learn, and helping them learn how to define the task, which I think is really key for this whole thing, because that's one of the things that students have so much trouble with. They kind of revert into their high school method of just memorizing everything, and really what we need to help them learn how to do is access those deeper levels of thinking and not just do the surface learning that Leonard referred to earlier. There's a lot of research out there that shows that the high school students coming to college use memorization as their primary study technique and really don't know how to go deeper than that.
That's
and
true.
So a lot of it is helping them formulate their study goals at the pre-study stage of the process. Excuse me, I'm just kind of getting over a cold here. So the next aspect that I help them look at is during their study and monitoring and then adapting. And so kind of being in tune with what they're thinking about, how they're thinking about it. Are they accomplishing what they need to accomplish? So kind of checking in with themselves periodically while they're in the process of studying and making sure that they're staying on the right track, making sure that their concentration level is where it needs to be, and they've eliminated their distractions and all that kind of thing. Great. And then when they find that something's not working, being able to adapt, try a different technique, or you know, kind of change their approach a little bit to what they're working on. And then in the final stage, the stage of, you know, what they do when they're finished studying, that's evaluation. So that's really taking a look at what they've learned, and have they learned what they need to know in order to perform the way they're going to on the test. They don't want to go into the test and have that be the first time that they think about a concept in a particular way. They want to have practiced that kind of thinking before the test. So by taking the time to evaluate their study process and see if they've accomplished what they intended to when they set out, then they can identify points of confusion, go back and clarify those, or go back and ask their teacher more questions, or whatever they need to do. So, and then, you know, just helping them identify specific strategies and techniques, because I think a lot of students just think that sitting and looking at the book is a study strategy, where really they need to be thinking about how they're organizing the material, how they're going to take notes on it so they can review it, how they can you know, develop a study guide to use when they go back to review for the test, and different kinds of things like that.
Great. I'm gonna have to move us forward. Thank you for sharing that, Tricia. Okay. I'm gonna put you on mute and go back to so I can wrap it up. Okay. Thank you so much. So I was very pleased that Tricia volunteered. I mean, that she was able to articulate her experience so well, and she had on a lot of great points that you all are going to experience as well. And I want to highlight a few in the couple of minutes that we have left, and then I want to see if you all have any questions before we close. So the ability to engage in the proper thought, to initiate the right thinking skill for the task that they're being tested for is essential to being effective learners. In fact, I would say that's the core of what we're going to be able to help students do. And so the process of setting the proper metacognitive goals, which are going to trigger their thinking, to having the right thinking, and then being able to assess your outcome before you actually take the test. This is a very important and well-researched factor that students who can more accurately self-assess their level of knowledge will be much stronger and much more effective learners. In fact, I got a chance to meet one of the researchers that pioneered that type of research in Boston last week at the College Reading and Learning Association, and she still is very strong on that's one of the key things, and that's what the diagram that we're going to get into tomorrow, the Think Well, Learn Well diagram and the Learning Sufficiency diagram, that's what those tools are designed to do. Those are metacognitive tools designed to help students assess, calibrate, and monitor their learning so that they'll know where they are at any given time in their study cycle. So again, we've looked at sort of where students, how they come to us based on high school, again, not as a negative, just based upon their experience, and then how they function when they get to us, and then we've sort of looked at a roadmap for where they need to go. So what I'd like you to do for tomorrow is, if you can come to tomorrow's session with some concept or area of study that you've recently helped a student with, or that you're currently helping a student with, or that is common on your campus that you see students struggle with, I'd like you to bring that in your mind or have it written down, because tomorrow we're going to get into the diagram so that we can learn how to use that tool to improve students' thinking and learning. And so all we've done today is to lead up so that you'd be able to understand and be able to use that particular diagram. So So are there any questions or comments or anything? If so, please add them in the chat. If not, it's after 4 o'clock. The session is technically over, and I will see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. and we'll begin right off without as much background knowledge and actually get into some specific applications and how to actually begin working with students. So any final thoughts you can include in the chat feature. While you're doing it, I should say one last thing before you all leave, and that is that for those of you who most recently signed up or registered for the webinar, your shipping materials are your supplies are in the mail, and you should get those if you're within the States by Friday. And you won't need them for tomorrow's session, but you'll get them by Friday, and you'll get an email with your shipping tracking information as well. So look for that. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to stay on if anybody wants to chat a little bit or has any questions. Oh, the today's meet. I'm going to go back to that slide for the today's meet so you can communicate on that. Getting there. There it is on the bottom. Thanks, Heather. Heather, I'm going to have you speak some at the next one, so be prepared. Thank you, Joe. Oh, you said I'm muted there, Meg? Thanks, Harriet. No problem, Amy. Thanks, Maria. Thanks for sending this, Joe. I'm going to look into this. Meg, I'm having trouble understanding what you're saying. So you're saying, on mine it says, you said the room is missing? This is Beth. Okay, Beth, sorry. Your screen is cutting off. So were you able to follow the webinar, or did you have problems with the webinar?